Morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well here. I'm going to do this a little bit differently with this part of this section here with law of cosines. This is a pretty easy one. I call this kind of plug and chug in terms of, you're given a problem to do and you just plug it into the equation and chug along and get your answers. Okay? So, as you can see here, we have the law of cosines that's used for certain cases. It's SAS and SSS cases. Right? What we'll see is we can't use law of sines for SAS or SSS. If you think about it, SSS in particular, in the law of sines, that would be your little a, your little b, and your little c, and that's not going to work. You're not going to have a proportion to solve. Okay? The SAS case, you're going to have the same problem in terms of law of sines. So we're going to have to plug in here. There's 3 sets of formulas. Actually, there's going to be 6 sets. As you can see, these ones here, these would be used for the SAS case. So in other words, the first equation, you would see that I'm going to have a B, a C, and an angle A, and I would plug into this to figure out little a. And I also want you to see that you're actually going to figure out a squared, and then you're going to have to take another step and take the square root of that. Okay? All right. Give you a moment here. Maybe you want to pause and write those 3 down if you haven't already. Okay? You need those formulas in your notes. And in fact, if I haven't said already, you should be taking notes as you're looking at this, and the nice benefit of that is you can pause this at any time. Okay? All right. So let's take a look at that. I'm not going to worry about the proof. I'm actually going to give that to you as kind of an extra credit thing. All right? So we're just going to go ahead and start solving here to show you how to do that. So here, this example here, I'm going to just take it one step at a time. I want to find the third side. All right? So I want to find the third side of this. I look at this is a side angle side case. Now, how do I know this is side angle side compared to what we just did, which was SSA? Well, if you notice, all the letters are different. So if I was looking at that as a triangle, and these we don't have to worry about 0, 1, or 2 cases. This would be B. Okay, I can make that angle A and angle C. It really doesn't matter which is which. All right, so then this would be your 9, and this would be your 4. And so you'll notice I have an SAS case. I don't need to draw this out. I don't need it like that. That's not what's important. But what I wanted you to see is that you can tell the difference, that this is an SAS case because none of the letters are the same, whereas in law of sines, I would have had a side B somewhere. All right? And in fact, that's what I'm solving for. And I know which one. Sorry about that, guys. Got a phone call while I was doing this. All right, so we're going to solve for side B first. So B squared equals A squared plus C squared minus 2AC cosine of B. All right? And we just put in our numbers. 4 squared plus 9 squared minus 2 times 4 times 9 times cosine of 40 degrees. And the nice thing about this, if you're using the calculators we have in class, or if you use that one app, Calc84, you can just type this in as is. You don't have to do it in stages. And if you do that, you don't run into any problems that you can run into if you don't. So when I type that one in, B squared, I get 41.84, blah, blah, blah. And I want to take the square root of that. I'm going to put some other numbers here. We take the square root of that, and we get our answer that B is 6.47. Okay? All right. And so that's it. That's solving using law of cosines for one of the sides. Okay? I'm going to pause here a minute. Okay, I'm back. So let's take a look at then how we would use this also to find an angle. Okay? So we need to use this to solve for an angle as well. So we could use the formulas as they're written. But the easier thing to do is kind of set up another formula. So I'm going to take this formula, the first one, and I'm going to solve for cosine A, not for A itself, but cosine A. So the first thing I would do is, subtract B squared and subtract C squared. Okay. And then I would divide by negative 2BC. And so I get this as a formula for cosine A. Now, to be honest, it's not very nice, and one thing we don't like here, and it's just more of a kind of cleaning things up a bit, is we don't like to see this negative below. So what we do is kind of multiply top and bottom by -1. So when I multiply the bottom by -1, of course, this becomes a positive. So if you kind of watch this, if I multiply everything by -1, it switches all the signs. This becomes a positive, this becomes a minus, plus, plus. Okay? Well, let's rewrite that. And so that's cosine A. And I'm going to put B squared plus C squared minus A squared all over 2BC. Now, part of the reason we do this is it makes this easier to memorize. I'm not going to ask you to memorize these cosine formulas because there's a total of 6 of them. But it would be easier because what you see is angle A is what we're trying to solve, and that's the side that's being subtracted. The other two are the B's and C's. Okay? So in fact, I'm going to give you all 3 of them. You might want to pause and, take a moment and write those down. Okay? Okay, so just to try out one of these so you can kind of see how the formula works, we're just going to go ahead and take one of them, and we are going to solve for one of the angles. Okay, just for one of them, just to practice. I'm going to choose C since the formula is right there for me. So I'm going to do cosine C. I'm going to go 2 squared plus 4 squared minus 5 squared all over 2 times 4. Now, you do have to be a little careful here. You could type this all in once. If you do, make sure to put parentheses around the top and around the bottom. Normally, what I kind of do is the top and then get an answer and then do the bottom. So in other words, this minus 25. I get -5. And then 2 times 2 times 4 gets me 16. And it is fine to have a negative. You will get some negatives for this for cosine. So -5 divided by 16 is -0.3125. So now we have to do the inverse, right? Inverse cosine of that answer. And so C should have been 108.21 degrees. Okay, we could have solved for the other ones. It didn't really matter. I just chose one of them to kind of practice and solve. Okay, all right. So why don't we do a full example here and something to talk about in terms of solving this. I'm going to do this one here, and what we have is a side angle side situation, right? Don't really need to know that, and I can tell because they're all different. So first question to you is, what side am I going to solve for? B. That's right. So we're going to use the B squared is A squared plus C squared minus 2AC cosine of B. All right. So that's 2 squared plus 3 squared minus 2 times 2 times 3 plus cosine of 60. Type it all in one shot. Alright, so we get B squared is 7. So we got, now, this is one of those problems where that is what you probably will write down, but remember, you got to take the square root of that. So square root of 7 gets me about 2.65. So there's B. Now, let me tell you something. We could, at this point, use law of sines. All right? We now have all three sides in an angle. The problem with that is this is actually an SSA case, and it is possible that you have introduced a two-triangle problem and you would solve for the wrong one. Now, you could avoid that if you solve for the smallest angle. Okay, so in other words, if I look at my sides A, B, and C, A is the smallest side, so the angle A is the smallest angle. If I solve for the smallest angle using law of sines, then I won't have to worry about it. Safest thing to do, use law of cosines. It's easy anyway. It's a little longer to punch in your calculator, but it's pretty easy. So that's what I recommend is if you start with law of cosines, finish it with law of cosines. So I'm going to do cosine A, that formula, which says b squared plus c squared minus a squared all over 2 times b times c. All right, well, b is 2.675 or 2.67 squared plus 3 squared minus 2 squared all over 2 times 2.65 times 3. Okay. I would probably type this all in one shot in this case, but you could do it in stages as well. So, I'm going to do it right now. Oops, I forgot a parenthesis. Like I said, if you're going to do this all in one shot, you got to have parentheses around the top and parentheses around the bottom. When I did, I got cosine A is 0.75471. Okay? And then if I do inverse cosine of that, I get angle A is around 40.99 degrees. Okay? And again, depending on your rounding, I'm looking at my notes here, and I must have used a slightly smaller number, and I had 40.89 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to have to accept some different variations here. All right. So now the last thing to find is angle C. Well, you do that by adding B and A, which is 100.99. So that's going to give me, in this case, 79.01 degrees. Okay. All right. All right. One more example. Okay. And this is the SSS case, all three sides. So we got to solve for an angle. It really doesn't matter which angle you solve for. So I'm just going to start with A. Okay, and that's b squared plus c squared minus a squared all over 2 times b times c. So in this case, 3 squared plus 6 squared minus 4 squared, 2 times 3 times 6. I'll type this in, 3 squared, 6 squared, minus 4 squared. Again, don't forget, if you're going to do it all in one shot, which I'm doing right now, put parentheses around the top and bottom. And you do get cosine A, 0.80555555 keeps going on. So second cosine of that, the inverse, angle A is 36.33 degrees. Okay? Again, I could use law of sines at this point, but I do have a problem that I have to be careful that I solve for the right one. I would solve for angle B because that's the smallest one. But I think it's easier. Just go ahead and use your cosine B, a squared plus c squared minus b squared over 2 times a times c. So 4 squared plus 6 squared minus 3 squared, 2 times 4 times 6. All right, so we're going to type that in. So we get cosine B, 0.89583. Inverse cosine. Remember, do cosine. One of the mistakes students make after doing all the law of sine stuff is they do inverse sine. Okay, so we got A is 36.33, B is 26.38. You would add those two and subtract from 180. If you want to use law of cosines to get part C, you could. That's what we get for angle C. All right. So that's all we're going to do for now. I just wanted you to kind of look over this and see how to do law of cosines. It is pretty easy. It's just kind of plugging into the formulas. Okay. All right. Have a good day, everyone.